Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christa Baker Alexander. Christa Ann Baker was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel and Jones County, Mississippi, to Pastor Winfred Baker and Patty Ann Baker. She was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers. When Christa was 8 years old, her family moved to Abota Springs, Louisiana, where they built a church and actively participated in its activities. Growing up, Christa traveled extensively with Christian missionary organizations to help those in need, particularly children. She was homeschooled and later pursued a degree in Christian education through online courses at the North Tennessee Bible Institute. Christa's passion was serving others, especially children, and she hoped to start her own family one day. However, her faith took priority, and she dreamed of finding a husband who shared her values. Christa adhered to traditional values and chose to save herself for marriage, only dating with the intention of finding a lifelong partner. During this time, she developed close friendships, including one with Cootie Alexander, a fellow youth pastor who shared her passion for missionary work. Cootie was a charismatic and well-liked individual in his community. Their families met through the church and maintained a good relationship. Cootie had been friends with Christa for many years before he asked her father, Winfred Baker, for permission to marry her. Her father happily agreed. During their courtship, Cootie and Christa followed church traditions and refrained from intimate contact. Christa had even told her parents that she wanted to save her first kiss with Cootie for their wedding day. While Christa helped her parents at church, Cootie was pursuing a career as a paramedic. A year later, they decided to get married. On March 1, 2008, they exchanged vows in front of their families and church members. The wedding was a joyful celebration, and Christa was a beautiful bride. However, their happiness was short-lived. Just 4 months after the wedding, tragedy struck. On June 29, 2008, Cootie returned home from a night shift at around 6 a.m. to find Christa lying face down on the floor. She was dead. Cootie immediately called the police. Christa's body was found near the front door, with no signs of a struggle. A bullet wound was discovered in the back of her head, with burn marks on her skin, indicating that the shot was fired at close range. The gunshot wound suggested that the gun was positioned at the back of Christa's head when the shot was fired. A 9mm shell casing was found on the floor next to her body. Initially, investigators thought the crime might have been a botched robbery. It was possible that someone broke into the house, assuming it was empty, and then killed Christa to avoid leaving a witness. Police had thoroughly searched the house. A jewelry box was found on the bed, the gun cabinet had been forced open, and Christa's purse was on the kitchen table, showing signs of having been rummaged through. Additionally, many drawers and cabinets were left open, suggesting that the perpetrator was looking for something of value. After completing their search of the house, police began interviewing individuals who had access to the property. Christa's husband, Cootie Alexander, was the first person they spoke with. However, he was too distraught to answer questions immediately, and investigators had to wait for him to compose himself. Once he was able to speak, Cootie reported that everything had seemed normal the previous night before he left for his overnight shift as an emergency medical technician with Cadan Ambulance. He told that he called Christa multiple times throughout the night, but she didn't answer her phone. He also sent her several text messages, which she didn't respond to. Assuming she was just tired and had fallen asleep, he didn't think much of it. However, when he returned home the next morning, he was met with a disturbing scene. The front door was slightly open, and upon entering, he found their belongings scattered everywhere and Christa lying on the floor with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. He immediately checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Panicked, he called 911 right away. The investigators were tasked with determining who could have entered the house while he was at work. It was possible that the perpetrator waited until Christa was alone before striking. They also explored the possibility that Christa may have let the killer into the house herself, as there were no signs of a struggle on her body or in the house. This suggested that she may have known her attacker and didn't feel threatened until it was too late. Cootie informed the investigators that a rifle and a shotgun were missing from the gun cabinet. What made the situation even more tragic was that Christa was 17 weeks pregnant, meaning that not only had he lost his wife, but also their unborn child. Cootie was overcome with grief and struggled to come to terms with the loss, unsure of how to move forward with his life. The case involved 2 victims, not one. The crime scene appeared unusual to investigators. The house was messy, but it didn't seem like the result of a typical burglary. Cabinets and drawers were open, but there was no evidence of rummaging or searching for specific items. It was as if the perpetrator wanted to mislead the police. The jewelry box was also open, but the jewelry was still intact, which raised suspicions. Christa's purse was open, yet all its valuable contents remained. The police noted that 2 firearms were missing from the house, but this was unusual because there were more firearms in the house that were not taken. This led investigators to wonder why the perpetrator didn't take all the available firearms. Based on these observations, investigators concluded that the crime scene was staged. It appeared that the perpetrator intended to kill Christa Alexander and then make it look like a robbery. As a result, the police began interviewing their neighbors to gather more information. This led to an unexpected lead in the case. Mavis Rabel, the 69-year-old neighbor and was landlord of the Alexanders, described they as quiet and recently married. They were active members of the Fundamental Baptist Church. Mavis remembered Christa Alexander as a kind and helpful woman who rarely went outside without her husband. Mavis last saw they on Saturday afternoon when Cootie Alexander was collecting the bodies of turtles he had shot in his backyard pond. This led investigators to discover that Cootie owned the gun. However, when police searched the Alexanders' home, they did not find a gun. Cootie claimed that only a rifle and a shotgun had been stolen from the house, but he never mentioned a handgun. Detectives suspected that Cootie might be hiding something. They searched the pond area and found several 9mm shell casings in the grass. These casings were similar to the one found near Christa's body. The police sent the casings to the state crime lab for analysis. The lab report confirmed that the gun Cootie used to shoot the turtles was the same gun used to shoot Christa. Investigators summoned Cootie to the police station for further questioning regarding his wife's death. He maintained that it was impossible for him to have committed the crime. Cootie explained that he had left for work at 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 28, 2008, and returned home the next morning at 6 a.m., providing an alibi that he was working throughout the night. Upon verification, Cootie's colleagues corroborated his claim, stating that he was indeed present at work all night. When inquired about the firearm, Cootie revealed that he owned a gun but claimed to have sold it the day prior to the incident to an unknown man named Steve. The alleged buyer had paid $500 in cash, which made verifying this claim difficult. According to Cootie, Steve was described as a white male in his mid-30s, around 6 feet 1 inch tall, driving an old Toyota pickup truck. Christa's parents shared their concerns with investigators, stating that they didn't believe Cootie's account of events. Her father, Winfred Baker, noted that Cootie showed little emotional response to Christa's death, a behavior that had started a few months before their wedding. They had been experiencing financial difficulties since moving in together, and the impending arrival of their child was likely to add to their struggles. Christa's parents also suspected that Cootie was having an affair with a colleague, who had even attended their wedding. Christa had confided in friends just weeks before her death that she suspected Cootie was cheating on her. As investigators dug deeper into the marriage, they became increasingly convinced that Cootie and Christa had different visions for their future. However, Was this enough motive for Cootie to take Christa's life, especially given that she was carrying their unborn child? The police had one lead, a man named Steve, who Cootie claimed had bought the gun used to kill Christa. Investigators set out to find Steve, using the description provided by Cootie. Meanwhile, they brought Cootie in for further questioning, asking him to provide a detailed account of his activities before, during, and after work on the day of Christa's death. This time, his story differed from his initial statement. The investigators found several inconsistencies in Cootie's story. He failed to mention a man named Steve, who was allegedly at his house, and to whom he had sold a gun. Additionally, while on duty, Cootie showed no concern for his pregnant wife Christa's well-being when she didn't answer his calls, despite knowing she was home alone. He could have asked a family member to check on her, but didn't. Furthermore, the crime scene appeared to have been staged, which raised suspicions about Cootie's involvement. As the investigators applied pressure, Cootie's story began to unravel. After several hours of interrogation, he changed his story entirely. He claimed that he had been sleeping on the couch before his night shift and that his wife had woken him up late. He stated that he wasn't angry with her for waking him up late and that it wasn't an issue. Cootie then explained that he had been walking around the house with a gun, intending to take it to work because a colleague was interested in buying it. He said he was fooling around, aiming the gun at objects and making click, click noises. He approached Christa from behind, put the gun to the back of her head, and claimed that an accidental shot occurred. He maintained that it was an accident and that he didn't intend to harm her. When he realized Christa was dead, he was scared and didn't know what to do. Cootie Alexander admitted to staging a crime scene to make it look like a robbery. He took several items from his house, including weapons and a DVD player, and drove to work with the front door left open. His plan was for someone to discover the open door and lights on, and then find his wife, Christa, while he was at work. However, this plan failed. On his way to work, Alexander threw a pistol and other items, including his wife's jewelry, out of the car window. By the time he arrived at work, the only items left in the car were a DVD player and a Sony radio. He gave the DVD player to a colleague, Allison Sharp, with whom he had been having an affair. Alexander and Sharp kissed and held hands before and after his wedding, spending one night at a Baton Rouge hotel. While his wife Christa was at church camp, he took Sharp to a hotel for a jacuzzi evening with fine china plates, meal and wine, amidst supposed financial difficulties with his low salary of $11 per hour and stalled professional certification efforts. County and his pregnant wife, Christa, were struggling financially and unemployed, and on top of that, their washing machine had broken. But Alexander managed to come up with money for a romantic evening at Callaway Inn with his mistress, Sharp. Police later determined that a shocking act unfolded in the home, contradicting Cootie's initial claim that Christa's death was accidental. Detectives found it difficult to prove direct involvement, but believed Cootie's explanation was suspicious. Despite the challenges, police were convinced that Christa's death was not an accident, and Cootie's actions raised more questions than answers. After the police arrested Cootie Alexander, Christa's parents were able to find the strength to forgive him. The Baker family came together to mourn the loss of their beloved daughter and what would have been their fourth grandchild. Christa's father, Winford Baker, remembered her fondly, saying, "She was a sweet and lovely person." Christa had made a significant impact on those around her, having completed 17 mission trips during her lifetime. Winford Baker recalled a conversation he had with Cootie shortly before his arrest. Although it was brief, Baker described the encounter as emotional, saying, "We hugged and cried together." Despite his desire for justice, Baker stated that he had already forgiven Cootie. "We forgave him even before we knew who was responsible," he said. Baker found comfort in knowing that Christa was now in a better place, saying, "She's with the Lord, in heaven, and at peace." The trial started on August 2, 2009. Prosecutors claimed that Cootie's behavior after Christa's death implied that he had acted on purpose. They wondered why he didn't call 911 right away if the shooting was truly an accident. Instead, Cootie faked a robbery and left Christa's body for 12 hours before going home and calling 911. Prosecutors also questioned Cootie's story that the shooting was accidental, noting that he was an experienced gun owner who had received proper training from his father. Cootie Alexander, 24, was charged with second-degree murder for the death of his wife, Christa. Cootie had admitted to being involved in her death, which he claimed was a result of his poor decision-making. After initially going to trial, Cootie suddenly changed his plea to guilty, ending jury deliberations. This unexpected turn of events came about when Christa's family agreed to a plea deal that had been proposed earlier. Alexander was sentenced to 55 years in prison in August 2009.